Well, good day and welcome to you to September the 14th. I hope you're having a wonderful day wherever you happen to be. My name is Gary Willing. I want to welcome you to Search for Signs. If you're new, welcome you back if you have been here before. And as always, stay as long as you want, come and go as you please. But in the meantime, if you want to know more about this information and see if there's anything to this for yourself, I've included links to websites that give you wonderful background information. And those links are in the description portion of every one of these videos. So you can either look into it or not. It's totally up to you. Now, I only had one person comment since the last video I put up because I've been putting these videos up this week in rapid fire. So it's actually been less than a day since I put the last video up. And I do need to kind of lay some things out here before I get into it. Because if you are hearing these videos for the first time, and I just go right into what this person had to ask and talk about and try to address it, you will at the very least be very confused. More than likely, you'll be so turned off about what I'm about to talk about because you don't know, you don't have any reference to why we're talking about it in this way, that you probably will never come back. So I just want to say something real quick, is the intention of putting these videos up, okay, is for us to talk about and look at the information about Maitreya and the Masters of Wisdom. Why are the Masters coming back now? Why is it important that they're doing it at this particular time? And of course, what does it mean for everyone that they are coming back at this time? But even more importantly than that, the priorities of the teacher, which if you really wanted to scale it all away and just get to the heart of it, is that humanity must, for its very survival depends upon it, create peace, put war behind us forever. And there's two reasons that I can come up with as to why it's so important that we do this, okay? First is the most obvious, is that we have nuclear weapons that could destroy ourselves. And any time there's a little skirmish in between a country, in between two countries or whatever, it could always escalate to the point where a nuclear weapon is eventually used against another group of people. And that would eventually lead to, it would trigger basically a chain reaction that would lead eventually to the ending of life on this planet. That's one very plausible scenario by not creating peace. The other one, which might not be something that you relatively think about very often because most people don't talk about it in this way, is the environment. If nations don't learn to cooperate with one another, we won't be able to solve the environmental problem together, because it's a problem that we're all creating at the same time, and we have to do something about it together. If we don't, it will be too late, and then we won't be able to live here anymore. And then where are we going to go? We can't just go fly to Mars. There's no other planets that we can breathe the air anywhere close by, right? So this is it. This is our only planetary home. And so if we do not do something about that one thing, we are in serious trouble. So it will take nations cooperating together. And Maitreya says the only way we can bring about peace is to bring about justice. The only way we can bring about justice is to share the resources of the world, where nations give up their excesses to other nations in order to help rebuild those nations, or those nations can use those resources for what they need and then give back other resources that they have in excess of in payment of it. It's like a lease-lend kind of thing. But if we don't start the principle of sharing, we will never bring about justice, and we will never bring about peace, and then our future is in jeopardy. So that's where it kind of fits into this. So that's the most important thing that we're talking about. That should be really the most important thing that we are looking at when in reference to this information, is the problems of the world and how to solve the problems of the world. Because I say it all the time, and I don't just say it when I'm addressing a comment coming from someone with a different viewpoint, okay, is that I'm not putting these videos up to change your ideology. I don't even care what your ideology is. I don't even care what your beliefs are. I'm only concerned about the problems of the world and how we can solve them together. So to me, I have no problem talking about this information, letting you look at it, and you saying, I don't agree with this at all. But I think we should do something about the environment, or I think we should put war behind us forever, or I think we should end hunger, or something like this. That to me would light me up more than you just believing what I have to say based on the fact that I said it. Okay? Because belief does not ultimately mean anything other than just to the person. And we all have different beliefs on things. So why try to change your belief? You try to change my belief. It really doesn't matter. And then we'll still be in the same boat. So if I convinced someone that I was right and they were wrong, and they finally admitted it to me, and as they say on the internet, I destroyed that person, or whatever they call it, or, like when they have these debates and so forth, we're still in the same boat. We still got wars out there. We still have an environment that's dying. What's won? Nothing. What's lost? A lot of time debating back and forth. Okay, so I needed to set this up, because when I start reading this, it might make a little bit more sense. But the problem is, I get a lot of people, because of the titles of my videos, because I'm talking about Maitreya in a certain way, they have an ideological difference. Naturally, it's really to be expected, and they have a real problem with that, and they comment in that way. And like I said, I have no problem with them believing what they believe. Now, I've made a commitment to myself to try to answer any questions that come my way and address comments that I think we can learn from. So most of the comments and most of the questions that come my way are coming from an ideological questioner kind of thing, versus, hey, what's this? How do we solve this problem? Or what do you think Maitreya would say about solving the environment, or this, that, and the other, and those kind of things. It's more about an ideological difference, which I don't think is the most important thing to talk about, but it's all I have. That's mainly what I get in terms of my comments and my questions. So I'll try to answer it as much as I can. Now, this person, Smoke Doja, who's commented quite a bit over the past few days, I devoted quite a bit of time in the last video addressing a concern that he had about the name Lucifer, in reference to Alice Bailey and Helena Blavatsky's work. And I tried my best to address it in that way, talk about what I think they were talking about, which is totally different than what a fundamentalist Christian would think they were talking about. I.e., they think they're talking about Satan. I think they're talking about the bringer of light, and what that means. And it's not an individual per se, but has to do with the oversoul of humanity. Anyway, so there's some follow-up questions to this, and there's some follow-up concerns about this and so forth. But then I talked about how words change meaning. So would I today, if Alice Bailey was alive today and they were trying to think of a name of that organization, that trust that they were going to use, and somebody in the group said, hey, let's call it Lucifer Trust, I might say, you know what, we might want to think about, I get where you're coming from. I get that you don't mean it means Satan Trust, it means something different, but there are a lot of people out there that are going to get triggered by that name. Maybe we can think of a different name, that kind of is talking about what you want to talk about and what you want it to represent, right? That's what I would say. So we're living in a different time, right? But words change meaning over time. So I can't really honestly say that Lucifer does not mean Satan, because for 99.9% of the people out there, that's exactly what it means. What I can say is that Alice Bailey, Helena Blavatsky, even the Masons were not talking about Satan when they mentioned it in that way. That's all I can say. Okay? So I use this as an example. I use the swastika. This is the reason why I'm bringing this up, is because the fifth word in the first sentence is Hitler. And this is the reason why we're talking about the Nazis in this way. So had I not mentioned this, it would have been very confusing to people. But anyway, that the swastika was just a symbol that's an age-old symbol for one of the crosses, like the Cardinal Cross or the Aquarian Cross, which have different meanings. And the Nazis used it to create the symbol for their flag and their party. So today, if you have a swastika anywhere on anything, whether it's your car, your house, your clothing, people are going to automatically think that you are a white fascist Nazi, neo-Nazi, right? When if you were a Tibetan or a Buddhist that was using that symbol because that's a symbol in Tibetan Buddhism, you're going to be trying to explain it to somebody that's not going to even want to hear what you have to say. Because they're thinking you're talking about the Nazis and the persecution of the Jews and the Holocaust and all that stuff. You see what I'm saying? So it's very difficult or impossible to differentiate between the two. So why even bring it up, I guess is my point. It's kind of gotten to the point now where it doesn't, have it's kind of lost its original meaning, I guess is my point. Now, the other thing, and this is the tail end of it, he brings up a biblical verse, and this has to do with his concern as to why Maitreya is not claiming to be Maitreya or claiming to be who he really is now. And he has concerns about that too. So that kind of sets up the conversation, okay? All right. Now, he said, yeah, I know that Hitler called it the Volk, or the basic principle of the blood, where he believed every German soul made up by a whole made the Volk. And yes, he got the swastika from the Thule Society, who got it from the Himalayas. It's been around thousands of years, so I see it's the same theory Maitreya has in Lucifer. Because I know you guys are tied into the Thule Society and Blavatsky, etc., because Blavatsky ran Lucius Trust at one point, which is tied into Freemasonry, and Albert Pike said, yes, Lucifer, the light bearer, is the god of Masonry in morals and dogma, so why does Masonry call Lucifer their god if he isn't real? Wouldn't they call him a teacher like you guys do Jesus? That to me doesn't make any sense. I would never call anyone my God if I believed they weren't real. Do you have any insights into that? And then he quoted John 8:25, and this is in reference to Maitreya not claiming to be Maitreya. He says, someone asked Jesus, who are you? They demanded. Jesus replied, the one I always claimed to be. So this verse says Jesus always claimed and told people who he was, so we definitely disagree there. Thanks for taking the time to answer my questions, Gary. And of course, as always, it's my pleasure to try to answer your questions. Whether I do or not is a whole other thing. All right, so the important thing to look at in terms of the Nazis, okay, is the Nazis are a resurgence of or actually World War II was a resurgence of an ancient battle that happened in Atlantean times about 100,000 years ago between the forces of light on this planet and the forces of darkness on this planet. The forces of light being the masters of wisdom and the forces of darkness being referred to as the lords of materiality. And at the time, humanity was used equally by both groups. And there was a great war. It resulted in the eventual destruction of Atlantis, which was in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean at the time and has been destroyed. Depicted in the Bible as the flood. According to the Ageless Wisdom Teachings, Noah was a master who was warning people about the impending disaster and destruction of Atlantis. Some people listened to him, of course, a lot of people didn't. And then yada, 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 it was destroyed eventually. Now, that war between those that raged on, it raged on really underground symbolically, and then was resurfaced again during the times of World War I and World War II, from the master's point of view, which was one conflict. The Axis powers of the Nazis in Germany, the fascists in Italy, and the militarists in Japan made up the representational group of the forces or the lords of materiality or the forces of darkness. The Allied powers of Russia, Britain, and England made up the triangle that represented the Allied powers, represented and were supported by the masters of wisdom or the forces of light. What we call the Antichrist, which people are looking for, they think Maitreya is the Antichrist, they think this person's the Antichrist, that one's the Antichrist. The Antichrist, it was a symbol in the Bible. It was representative of the energy that was being sent out through the Axis powers that destroys the old ways of thinking and relating to allow a new way of thinking and relating. Never to be meant to be interpreted as an individual. It was all just a symbol in the Bible that John wrote in there to represent this energy that's destructive but necessary. Now, that's where the Nazis come into all of it. Now, the Freemasonry and all that stuff, I'm not really that familiar with because I'm not a Mason. I can only tell you what Alice Bailey talked about it. It's an ancient spiritual organization that's really not unlike any other organization. That's just their texts are so distorted and there's so much misrepresentation in their text that it really has lost its original intention and meaning. But eventually it will be resurged. A lot of that will be cleaned out, just as the churches will. a lot of the distortions in the Bible and then the Quran and the Bhagavad Gita will be taken out in that way. And it will be truer to what the original teachings of Jesus was, the original teachings of Muhammad was, the original teachings of Krishna was, and so forth, in kind of the same way. But right now it's just, according to Ben's master, is nothing more than just a business organization where businessmen get together and they have these rituals and talk about whatever they talk about. I don't know. I'm not a Mason, okay? And so anything to do with Albert Pike, what he believed, what he thought, and he talked about really has no reference to this information whatsoever. So they're two totally different things in my mind. Now, a point of fact, Helena Blavatsky never ran Lucis Trust. That was Alice Bailey Groups. That was the Alice Bailey Group that did that. So, do I agree with their name? No. But I understand why they were trying to use that as a name, and then I probably got a lot of flack, and okay, well, can't call it that, let's call it something different, I guess. I don't know. But I know enough about this information to know that that's what you think they were talking about is not what they were talking about, I guess is my point. So that would be the only thing that I could really give any insight on it. Now, in terms of Lucifer being referred to as a master or a teacher, like you asked, and so forth, Lucifer that was written in the Bible in the way that it was written in the Bible, according to the Ageless Wisdom Teachings, the esoteric view of the Bible, which is maybe perhaps not what most people see the Bible to mean. There's an esoteric side to the Bible and an exoteric side to the Bible. The esoteric look at what they were writing in the Bible as Lucifer had to do with the soul of humanity. And the soul of humanity is one soul. We actually are one soul. Just as animals, like if you look at a dog or an elephant or a cat or a snake or whatever, they have one soul for themselves. We really are one soul too. There's no separation. We talk about it all the time on this channel. There's no separation between any one of us. Now, the difference between humanity and an animal soul is that humanity is, each and every one of us are individuals of that one soul. We're kind of fragments of that one soul. We're a dog. There's no individual dog. As much personality as a dog could have, I love my dogs that I've had in my life. You know, I had a bulldog named Monica, and now I have a golden doodle named Jojo, who definitely likes to record on the video. At the same time, you'll hear her squeaking the ball or shaking her head or barking from time to time. The soul between Jojo and any other dog that's around, whether it was a poodle or a chihuahua or whatever, they share the same soul. You know, so there's no individual Jojo that has an individual purpose out there that goes from life to life the way that we do. We have an individual soul, but we make up what it collectively makes up is that oversoul. That's what they were referring to in the Bible esoterically as Lucifer, which is Latin for bringer of light. You got lux and afer. Afer means bringer of. Lux has to do with light. So, of course, was at some point people started to make it mean it was the fallen angel or the angel of, which is Satan or whatever like that. But that means really had nothing to do with it. But, and this is my point, okay, not to say I'm right and you're wrong or whatever. I understand where you're coming from. I understand why you think that that's what they were saying. I'm just saying that's not what they were saying. And even then, it doesn't have a lot to do with this information, because this information is, the Helena Blavatsky group, or Helena Blavatsky in particular, was the first person to bring the information about these masters to the public. That's all she did. And then she started writing these books, and then she created a group around her, which eventually became an organization called the Theosophical Society. Alice Bailey was a part of the Theosophical Society after, I think, Helena Blavatsky passed away. In her autobiography, she never talked about meeting Helena Blavatsky personally. So I think she came into that group after Helena Blavatsky had passed away. She eventually started to work with one of these masters who wrote quite a bit of work through her. And then she created a group around her, which eventually became an organization. And now they're just an organization named Lucis Trust. whose origin of that word was Lucifer trust, which meant bringer of light to them. But it didn't mean Satan trust. But I understand the hang up because of the confusion about that word. And this is where Maitreya, when he is going to be asked about different ideologies, just as he's been asked about the names that he's referred to, Christ, Imamadi, Messiah, Sri Krishna, the fifth Buddha, he says these are only names, just as you could say the same thing about all the different ideologies. These are just ideologies. They mean nothing, really. The truth is in there. If you look at it hard enough and you sift away all the dogma, you'll see the truth in what Jesus was talking about in the teachings. But there's so much put in and taken out that it doesn't make a lot of sense. You have to read into it to find the truth. But the truth in what Jesus was talking about is the stuff that will change your life. The stuff that makes you a more loving person towards somebody else, that makes you harmless makes you at least attempt to be more harmless towards somebody else. The ideology, the dogma does not do any of that. And so just using Jesus' own words, a tree is known by its fruit. The fruit of dogma, the fruit of ideology is nothing but confusion, division, pain, and suffering. Because that's all it creates eventually, is confusion in the mind of the person. The fruit of the seeds of the truth that Jesus was talking about loving thy neighbor and love each other and feed thy sheep and looking at the law of cause and effect in that way. The fruit of that is something totally different than confusion. It actually brings about unity, brings about compassion toward one another, harmlessness toward one another, in a way that dogma in and of itself does not. So I can go into the relationship if you want. You can ask me if you want, Jesus' relationship with Maitreya and how that relates to what was written in the Bible and so forth. But that would be like another 20-minute video. You know what I mean? But in short, Jesus was the world teacher for the then new age of Pisces, which is now coming to an end. He was a very, very advanced member of humanity, very advanced, but he was not yet a master at that time. He was just a teacher. And there was a lot to what he had to say, right? He was speaking very simply to people who were very uneducated at the time. But that was his role. But if you look at it from an esoteric standpoint, it was the first time in human history that love manifested in its perfection in a man. It doesn't mean it's the last and only time. It just means that was the first time it happened. Quite an extraordinary accomplishment for humanity for that to happen, right? As dark and as dismal as this world can be, that was just an amazing accomplishment. It's unbelievably rare to have, especially at this low level of this planet, to have that manifest in that way at that time. Unbelievably rare. The incredible thing is that this planet has had it twice. Not just once, but twice. First, it was the Buddha who worked through the Gautama Buddha in the exact same way that Maitreya worked through Jesus. So when people like myself look at Maitreya and we call him the Christ, I'm not saying he is the only true Son of God and Jesus is not. The Christ means something, that word means something totally different to me than what it means to the evangelical Christian for Jesus. But esoterically, Maitreya was a master at the time that Jesus was still a very advanced member of humanity in Palestine. But the law had been, since that ancient war in Atlantean times, to get back to that the masters would work from behind the scenes through their disciples in the world. So disciples like Moses, Isaiah, Rama, Krishna, and this isn't not just the Christian field, but in every walk of life, there were teachers that came that were working indirectly or unknowingly with these masters or quite consciously with these masters like Jesus. And these great ones worked through them in that way. They were in the Himalayas, they were in the desert regions of the world, far away from humanity, but yet working with a disciple on a certain part of the plan. And Jesus' part of the plan was, he was the world teacher that inaugurated the Piscean age. taught humanity how to love for the first time. It was an example, a perfect example of how to do that. But there was other aspects of his life that Christians don't even know that he was even teaching him at that time. So he was also teaching all of us through the writings of the Bible about the path of return back to becoming a master when he talked about the prodigal son. Also, there was aspects of his life, such as the birth, baptism, transfiguration, crucifixion, and the resurrection, that were symbols of what's called the initiatory process that we all take, the 5 great expansions of consciousness, in order to become a perfected master like these masters. But they have to go through those steps, and Jesus symbolized it in his life in that way. There was quite an incredible esoteric side to the Bible. Now, these masters knew, ever since they retreated, that eventually they would have to come back into the world, make themselves known again for who they are, because for eons upon eons prior to this, millions of years actually, they were already known for who they were. But over the last 100,000 years, all the knowledge and truth of these masters has all been forgotten. So we've created dogma and confusion and ideologies around some of these great teachers like Jesus, like Muhammad, like Krishna, like the Buddha even to some degree. Created these ideologies around what they had to say, but they weren't there to create an ideology. They were there to teach humanity a part of how to become, how to bring us together as one family, but also leading us eventually back to the point where these masters could come back into the world in the way that they're doing, which they're starting to do now. And so eventually, in the not so distant future, when we recognize Maitreya and he's known for who he is and those kind of things, and he starts to introduce these masters more and more, and we start to see them, how they're teaching humanity. We start to see how they're examples of really unconditional love in a perfected way, with the wisdom that they have, the humor that they have, the joy that they manifest in that way. It will make it easier for us to understand that the way that we've been living is wrong. That we need to be more like them, because they are who we are, really, in our hearts. They are who we are. And when we see them in that way, we'll start to emulate them in that way. And then we'll start to lose this confusion and this ideology and this dogma that we have in between the Christians and the Muslims and the Hindus and so forth, and the Republicans and the Democrats, the East and the West, between the Israelis and the Palestinians. We'll start to lose those divisions, and we'll see that we are really just one family. Now what? Now what do we do? Well, first thing we got to do is save the environment. You know what I'm saying? Because if not, we won't have, it doesn't matter how much you love each other, we won't have a place to live. So then we'll take that seriously. And it probably won't take us very long to solve the environmental problem. Because, even looking at what happened when we had the lockdowns, for as little time as we had the lockdowns here in America and around the world back in 2020, how quickly the air cleaned up, when we just didn't drive quite as much, right? How easy it was to see the environment start to heal itself. But that's why we're talking about it now. That's why we're looking at this now, because it's an unbelievably incredible, unprecedented event that's happening now. The reappearance of the Christ and the Masters of Wisdom. It's unbelievable. But yet the ideology of each one of these religions precludes it from seeing that that's what's going on now. You know what I'm saying? They see it, like Christians see it as an event that will happen when Jesus comes back from the clouds. The Muslims are waiting the Imam Mahdi to come back in the city of Damascus. They're missing the fact that their Imam Mahdi is already here, that the Christ is already here. But it's not an ideological Christ. It's not an ideological Imam Mahdi. It's the reality of the teacher coming back to teach us the way forward, just as Jesus did, just as the Buddha did. So hopefully that answers some of that. So anyway, thank you very much for the question, Smoke Doja, and I can tell by your concerns that you are at least thinking about this information, and I respect you for that. And as everybody else, I want to say how much I love everyone. Have a great day. Stay safe out there, and I look forward to putting up another video and talking about this stuff in the future.
Remember to take action and help SOP
save our planet. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to talking to you again in future videos.